Hi there, everybody. I'm going to paint some mandarins in a bowl, and I'm going to use a very limited three color plus white palette. And everything's going to be in focus this time. So I'm going to go over all the same stuff I went over in the webinar. Unfortunately, you won't be able to ask me questions, although you can use the messaging feature in YouTube and ask questions. I probably won't get you an answer right away, but I'll be sure and check it, as much as I can every day for a while in case you have any questions. And usually I do get around to them, just perhaps not right away. At any rate, here's what I'm using. I'm using whole bean gouache, right? Red, yellow, blue, plus white. I'm going to be using a single half-inch flat. I've got my little spritzer. I like to put my paint in a little pill box. You can use any kind of plastic box with a cover. This doesn't seal particularly well. However, if I'm traveling, I'll throw it in a Ziploc sandwich bag, or I'll just put my whole palette inside like a Tupperware style container. For my palette, I'm using a wet palette, and it's made out of a enamel tray, which is nice because an enamel tray is metal, and as you can see, it's magnetic, so I have little magnets holding everything down. The towel underneath is this is called, I think it's called a Swedish towel, but paper towels will work fine. This is just like a permanent paper towel. It works just fine. Get it nice and wet, and then lay your palette paper over the top. For palette paper, I like this stuff. Bienfang Graphics Pad 360 marker paper. It's 100% cotton, and it's really tough. It holds up. It holds up to a beating that you're going to give it when you're mixing paint on top of it. Today I'm painting on a little 6x6 inch sheet of Canson XL watercolor paper. It's inexpensive, but it's a real workhorse for me. I use it a lot, and it works great. I'm going to use regular blue, what is this, Scotch brand house painter's tape to tape down my paper. And I have a little sort of a hack, a little trick. Any of you who've taped your painting down, watercolor, gouache, casein, whatever, it dries, and then you go to peel it, and what happens? You tear right through your painting. So tear off an appropriate sized piece, right? And stick it to your shirt or your pant leg, okay? A few times. All right, so here we go. I'm going to move this off to the side a little bit so I can, doesn't get in the way of my hand. Oh, the other couple of things I have, of course, I have a towel, which you're going to need, or a paper towel, or I use a cloth towel. This is an old pool towel that's, worn out. It's welcome. And a ruler. And the ruler comes in handy because you can make a simple grid. I like to do this because a lot of times I paint like single objects. It's really fun. It's very satisfying, and it's great practice. But if I want to center the object, I'll draw a line in the middle of my page. 6x6, so it's not super big. I'll go over the color theory ideas, the color strategies I'm using. Very simple stuff. Okay. At any rate, here we go. I want the bottom of my jar to be, right about there. I want the top edge of my jar probably right about there. And if I measure from side to side, it's probably, if I make a square here on this, if I make a square, that's about a square. So it's not quite twice as wide as it is tall. So I'm just going to sort of arbitrarily choose a width. And I'm going to draw a line that's pretty straight up and down here for my bowl. And then a slight inward slant. So that vertical line, I'm going to go just inside that vertical line. Sometimes if you make a vertical, you can more easily determine your angles, just so you want them to be even, more or less. And of course, I could use a ruler to make these lines, but where's the fun in that? This is obviously way too slanted. There's the fun in that, is making a bunch of drawing errors. But you can fix minor drawing errors with your paint. Usually I don't like to do a lot of erasing when I'm laying something out. You can see on my reference picture, but the top of the bowl is about at my eye level. This edge is about straight across. You can see right here, there's a little bit of an ellipse, but I'm going to kind of ignore that. I'm just going to make it straight across as if the top edge were at eye level, because actually I'm looking at the actual bowl, and if I slouch a little bit, it is really at eye level. Um, the bottom, however, is slightly below eye level. We got a little curve on each side, and it drops down a little bit lower. So we have a very slight ellipse at the bottom. And then right off the bottom, we have our cast shadow, which runs right off the edge of our format and about halfway through the curve. That's our cast shadow. There's a little edge here, and I'm going to connect that up. That's the edge where the backdrop meets the stage. And you'll notice that the backdrop, this area here, is a little bit darker than this flat area here where the light is striking it more directly. And I usually draw that in. Now it's just a matter of placing our mandarins, right? So it looks like that first one comes to about there, and maybe about halfway, little more than halfway, I guess, through there. And more than half of it is below the line of the jar. And it's not a perfect circle. It's kind of you know, it's an irregular circle, right? So we don't have to draw it perfectly. And I'm just going to overlap my lines. Um, we've got another one that comes just about to the edge of the bowl and not quite to the bottom of the bowl and is slightly overlapped by the first one. So I'm going to make another sort of irregular circle. The distortion caused by the glass sort of flattens this one off. And then it's got kind of a blurry edge up here. This one overlaps ever so slightly the edge of the bowl. And this one's sort of edge on, so it's a little bit flattened, right? So just a little bit sort of a flatter, more oval shape. Right, and this one comes up here. We can see the inside there. This could perhaps be well, that looks pretty good. And then we've got this other one that comes down, just sort of a shape down here. And we might as well put in the cast shadows, kind of come across here, kind of some irregular shadows, and they kind of run up the side of this bowl. One more sort of comes out about halfway and right about there, and then it just sort of curves in. So that's our layout. Okay, we're ready to get some painting done here. I think a lot of times I'll put a yellow ochre wash on this. This time I'm not. I'm going to keep it really, really basic. Let me see if I'm going to have to move. I want to get as much palette as I can show you. Really basic. Ultramarine, flame red, and permanent yellow with permanent white. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take some permanent yellow, and there's a little bit of red already mixed in there. And then I'm just going to take just ever so little amount of flame red. Okay, because flame red is very potent. I don't want to just go ahead and dive in there and mix this all together all at once, because it's probably going to be too red. So flame red up here, yellow down here, and then I can kind of just grab the corner of that and mix it together. I can go more flame red up here, or yellow. And I have a little bit of a continuum. I have more of a red orange on this side, more of a yellow orange on this side. I hate to waste this paint that's on my brush because I still have an art student's mentality, but of course I'm a fabulously wealthy public school teacher, so I can afford lots of gouache. Just kidding. School teachers, even old ones like me, don't get paid a ton. So a little ultramarine here. So those are my three colors. I mix those two to get orange. If you are familiar with the color wheel, blue is opposite of orange, so it is the complement of orange. I'm going to take a little bit, whoops, I just got a drip on there. I'm going to take a little bit of that ultramarine and put it in my more red-orange mixture. Okay, and see how that sort of dulls it out? It kind of makes it brown. That's because complements cancel each other out, which is a really simple concept, but it's one that I go back to all the time. And it just so happens that that color is going to be a really close approximation to this color right there, that shadowed color. And this is kind of a darker version, but I can sort of pull it over. I'm going to add just a little bit of water, just dip my corner of my brush in. I want just enough water to let this flow nicely off the brush. So it's fairly opaque, but it's a little bit watery. Okay. And I can bring it in here and get more saturated colors with my orange. I just want it to be darker. I don't want it to be brown. I just want it to be kind of a dark neutralized version of orange, right? I'm leaving some areas open because there are some areas of uh, reflected light that are quite a bit more saturated. There's a little edge there. That's called an occlusion shadow. So I just add a little bit more blue to that. And then I can, of course, mix that in with the rest of my orange and get the sort of more normal looking shadows here. Those are actually a little washed out. So I'll come down here into the yellow, wash them out just a little bit, and the shadows kind of come across like that. At this point, if my shadow colors are sort of blending in with each other, that's really okay. I don't really mind. It doesn't bother me. Some areas on this little painting are going to be, I'm going to shape weld them. In other words, areas of similar tone, I'm just going to let the edges sort of disappear. Whoops, I just forgot I need the same color here, or close to the same color. Maybe a little more, a little brighter right in there. Okay, and I'm going to work mostly on these oranges, and then we'll jump in and work on our bowl. So where there's blue mixed in, there's really no coming back from that. So I'm going to grab some more yellow. This is pretty clean. I'll take my flame red and we'll start the whole process over again with our orange. But I want it to be more saturated, so no blue. And you'll notice I have not used any white yet. So a little redder up here, a little more red up here. And that's going to be a really nice color, I think, for these areas of reflected light down here. They're still dark, but there's a little bit more saturation to them. And that's where light is bouncing off the bottom here. It's bouncing off this surface and striking the underside of these mandarins. So reflected light's a wonderful thing. And I still want it to be dark. I just want it to be a little more saturated, a little more of a vibrant color. And again, if you need to add a little water just to let the paint flow off your brush better, that's quite all right. But if it's working, let's work with some full-bodied gouache here. It's about the consistency of heavy cream. And as it kind of peters out on my brush, I just let it go. I'm going to work this a little bit more in here to get rid of those edges that you could see through. And that's the nice thing about gouache is that I just reactivated that by getting it a little bit damp. And I was able to make a nice soft edge there. Now let's move into a little bit more yellow, too yellow. So we'll add a little red and I'm going to add, now let's just stick with that. No white yet. And let's just go ahead and block in that nice, deep, saturated orange. And let's see if I can scumble it in, get that to sort of soften that edge, blend that together a little bit. And I don't always go for a really soft edge. To me, one of the most fun things is to just get two colors that are side by side and just have them work out without any, fancy blending or anything. Just two colors right next to each other, and they function exactly how you want them to. That's satisfying. So a little redder up here. So I'm grabbing from the redder part of my mixture. And it's kind of a flat surface. And I need to blend that a little bit better. And we'll pull that slightly redder, deeper orange down from the top. And then Let's go a little more yellow for that edge that's catching more light. I like to not use any white until a little later in my process because white does certainly it lightens things. It makes our values lighter, right? And that's often what we want when we use white, but it has some unintended consequences. One is that white is a cool color. You can make it look hot by putting it next to the right things, but it actually cools off your colors. And the other thing it does is it washes them out. It makes them much less saturated. So I want to avoid using white if I can. And if some of my transitions, these are very round oranges. So the transitions are really smooth, but again, I don't care so much about that. I want to, if you can see some of the planes on the oranges in my painting, I'm totally happy with that. Let's reestablish this sort of dark shadow in here. And that's okay because I kind of left that alone for a long enough time that it dried a little bit, and now I can sort of paint on top of it. And I can come back in with my reflected light, reestablish that, soften those edges a little bit. Let's take some of that more reddish orange and put it in as an intermediate tone in between this and my brighter orange. That's a great way to soften things, I think. Intermediate tones, so you don't have to worry about so much about blending stuff. Okay, so that's too much blue. Add a little more red orange to that. Whoopsie, that's way too much red. Let's get some more yellow in there. There we go. And mix that with our blue, ultramarine, and that'll give us a nice dark setup there. So that's pretty good. And if it looks like I'm not matching these colors perfectly, it's true, I'm not. I've got 3 colors here and I'm doing my very best, but I'm never going to be able to match color for color. So what I'm shooting for here is to come up with a set of relationships that mimic what I see. They're not going to be exactly what I see. And that's pretty good for the oranges for now. I want to let them dry. And while they're drying, I'm going to work on my background. And this background this is a piece of just raw unprimed canvas. So it's kind of an off-white. It's warm. Color has, write this down if you guys have a pencil and paper. Color has 4 properties. It has hue, which is what color is the thing, like orange is a property of orange. It has temperature, which is the warm or cool of it. Orange is a warm color. Blue is a cool color. And then there's lots of in between, especially when you start to deal with neutrals. You can have relatively warm or relatively cool neutrals. And some might look warm in some circumstances, but when compared to other colors, it might change. So temperature is pretty relative. You have value. Value refers to how light or dark the thing is. If I took a black and white, applied a black and white filter that would be value. That's how light or dark things are, with no regard for color. And the last one is saturation. And saturation has to do with how much actual color is there. Right. So when we added blue, these areas with the blue, it's been neutralized, right? So those areas are a little bit browner, less saturated compared to the areas where it's pretty much straight orange, which are areas that are much more saturated. And when I do a background, what I want to do, I want to go temperature. I have a very warm subject. So instead of doing a warm background like I have here, I'm going to go with green, I think. And to do that, I'm going to take some of my ultramarine, put it down here, grab a little, well, not a little, but quite a bit of my yellow. I want this to be a relatively warm green, right? But it's still going to be cooler than the oranges. And that's very bright. That's very saturated. But if I grab this white and add it in, get a big blob of white here, the white automatically makes it less saturated. And to make it even less saturated, so this is going to be a neutral that's sort of based on green, I'm going to take some of my red, just a little bit, just enough to knock back the saturation of my green. I keep trying to grab some red and I'm unable to do it. There we go. That's maybe too much red. But that's the nice thing about gouache. You just sort of take a stab at it, give it a try, and try again, right? So it's okay because I'm going for something neutral. There we go. Now we're talking. And I don't want to mix completely with that because I might use that for a cast shadow or something later. But there we go. That's kind of what I was looking for. Kind of an off green, a sort of neutral, a neutral that's kind of leaning toward green. And I'm going to have some highlights here. So I want to keep it a little bit lighter, or excuse me, a little bit darker than my highlights are going to be. And if I overlap my mandarins a little, that's quite all right. Just want to see how that looks around there. And that's maybe a little too dark, so I'll go right next to it and lighten it up. Remember, that's going to dry a little darker. So I'm going to guess it, the color. I'm going to check it, and then I'm going to lay it down and cover it. It's gouache, and I can paint right over stuff, right? It's easy to fix things. And one of the main ways that I fix, or not that I fix, but that I deal with gouache's tendency to dry a little bit darker than it goes down, is I'll just paint it on and check. If I leave it wet on my palette, I can compare wet to wet. And if the relationships are good there, they're going to be good on the painting. While I'm painting, I can just lay it down. If it looks too light or too dark, I just change it and I just paint over it and adjust it. So for now, I'm okay with this mixture. And you can see I'm slowly lightening it up. And that's okay because I never mind. I never care. In fact, I'm always pretty happy if my backgrounds are, have some gradient, if they're a little bit mottled. I like seeing other colors that were laid down previously peeking through subsequent colors. So I'm totally okay with that. And now I'm going to show you the secret of glass. Okay, so glass, of course, is transparent. So the main color of this glass bowl is the color of my background. Or in the case of the oranges down here, it's the color of the oranges because it's whatever color's behind it. So I saved this. This is a little bluer here. I got more blue in there. And we have a dark sort of shoulder here that sort of cuts across and into our mandarins. And that same tone, I think, shows up right through there like that. And let's warm it up a little bit. Take some of this warmer stuff. Actually, might as well go with the darkest first. There's nothing super dark on this little composition. But these cast shadows down here that are sort of swirl through the glass are probably the closest things to something that's dark and neutral. But it's not, I mean, that's about as far as I want to go. That's pretty dark. And I'll probably be cutting that back and covering it over a little bit so I can mix some of this other background mixture. Remember, these are just variations of my background color. A kind of shadow kind of heads up into there. Maybe a little bit coming down, but I might paint over that. A little bit of an edge there. Maybe a little darker right along that cast shadow right on the bottom there. And these are a little bit cooler looking to me, so I'm grabbing a little more ultramarine and mixing it into my shadow color. And cast shadow comes off a little dark. That's probably too dark, but that's okay. It's always okay because it's gouache, right? We can take some of this medium background tone, bring it right around there, come off the end. Again, just all variations of my background color. Some's cooler, some's a little bit warmer. Let's go a little warmer. Let's actually take some orange and go even warmer because the back edge of that cast shadow, I think, is quite warm, and I'm going to lighten that up a little bit. It's warmer and it's lighter because there's light reflecting in from my backdrop. And we can grab some more of that darker, cooler shade there. That's not too bad. We'll reassess and adjust as we need to. Okay, so let's go back to our background color. I'm just going to take some more white and mix it in here. Let's bring that down. That's a little lighter than what I had, but perfectly okay. I'll just kind of blend it in. And I'm working with more full-bodied gouache as I go along. And you can see I'm getting some really nice sort of scumbly, dry brushy textures here. All right, let's keep this lighter on this side. So as my brush kind of runs out of juice, I get some really nice dry brush textures. Little reflection there. And then this is a little distorted here with this kind of glass is sort of distorting the shape of that a little bit. I can play that up. We have a very light passage right inside there. And the light kind of wraps around that mandarin. And in fact, sort of cuts into it a little bit. So I'm going to use the gouache and just sort of pull it down into that just to show a little bit of glass distortion. And this is light coming all the way up to that edge. It's a little bit of a dark edge there, but then we can let that sort of blend in because after all, it is glass. So it is kind of invisible in some spots. I'm gonna mix up some stuff that's a little almost on the greenish side and go very light here. A little more yellow. And that's kind of what we have, a little bit of that coming right down into there. Of course, I can adjust all of these things as I go. And that's a little dark. I just put that down to test it. That's really dark. But that's okay. Add a little white and just bring it right in. So it kind of matches up. All right, we can get rid of that. Or if not, get rid of it, we can make it a little less of a standout. Let's add a touch more yellow to this just to warm it up a little. I'm letting the sort of the dryness of this brush just sort of scrub over some of the edges of my mandarins just to soften those edges up just a little bit and introduce just a little sense of mystery into it. That a little more pronounced. That dark over a little bit. All right, so this area down below, remember, this is getting struck much more directly by the light down here because it's horizontal to the light. So I'm going to add more white on this far end and maybe a little yellow, a little bit of blue, a little bit of yellow. Let's kind of punch up the idea that this is kind of an acidy green. And of course, this is becoming much, much darker. But again, I'll just add some white and I'll get something that's pretty light and pretty bright. Okay, I like that. That's kind of an acidy off green that I think works really well. And I think it's sort of being pulled up into the glass by that sort of distorted effect of the glass. So glass affects things in a couple of ways. Number one, light passes through it, right? So it's transparent, but it also is shiny and glossy, and so light bounces off of it, right? So there's highlights and reflective areas, but also where it curves away from you, there's also darker areas, and those curves also often create distortion with the things that we're looking at through it. And this doesn't have a ton of distortions, but a little bit is probably in order along the edges of some of these mandarins. So this is kind of a little bit more obviously green. It's got more yellow in it. It's warmer. It's brighter in color and also lighter in value. And that's going to serve to sort of bring this front plane forward toward the viewer. We'll take some of the same very light, bright material, and let's just put it up here. Because again, I think that the glass is kind of pulling these tones from down here up into our composition. I need to dress up my cast shadow a little bit. It should be almost connecting there, but not quite. It's the areas that are a little bit lighter. And that's pretty good. Let's bring this cast shadow all the way in. And so far so good with the 1/2 inch flat. It's got corners. I can look at it edge on like that, and that's pretty narrow. Or I could make a very broad stroke like that, or I can just use the corner. You can get a lot of different shapes out of this type of brush. And a lot of times I don't like to I don't want to switch brushes because it just sort of it it gets in the way of my flow. I want to just keep the same brush and keep going. So I'm mixing up that sort of acidy green. I'm going to try and add just a little bit of the flame red this time so I don't completely wipe it out. And there, I'm getting pretty close to what my background is, or what I imagine it would be, and that is pretty close, right? Let's go all the way out, maybe to the background. I'll lighten that up a little bit so it matches up a little bit better. And I want my brush to sort of run out of paint because that's what's going to allow me to get those really nice sort of scumbly dry brush layers. I'm going to make this substantially lighter because I want these mandarins to show up a little bit better. I don't know if you remember what tone this paint was when I first laid it down, but it was substantially lighter. And gouache, of course, dries darker. So I'm doing the old guess and check. I can compare wet to wet here, and I know I'm making this a little bit lighter, and it's actually a little bit more obviously green, and that's okay. And I want it to be lighter up on this quadrant because that's where the light's coming from. So I think that'll give it a little bit of a little more truthfulness and just be kind of a fun thing to do. And you can see the brush marks are getting a little bit scrubbier. I'm building up the paint surface. White, in addition to cooling and desaturating things with gouache, is very opaque. So we can't live without it, but we certainly don't want to overuse it, especially not in those areas that you want to keep saturated. You want to avoid white in the saturated areas. I'm going to adjust that shape in just a little bit. There we go. And I'm going to leave that nice soft edge. To me, the roundness of the mandarins is accentuated by the soft edges, and the harsher edges in the glass sort of accentuates the idea that it's glass. Now we have a kind of a refraction through the glass, very light down there, very light up there. This background color well, let's actually mix some of this with the orange because there is sort of a reflection coming across that orange. So a little bit of background mixed with a little bit of orange, and you get a little bit of a sense that we're looking through this glass. And I can just sort of scrub that out just a little with my finger, and that works pretty good. I said I was only going to use a 1/2 inch flat, but I should have, been upfront about the fact that I'm also going to be using my finger. A little bit of some holiday here. We can see a little bit of paper through there, and I'm gonna lay in some highlight. So I want to kind of get rid of that. There's I didn't do a very good job of getting rid of it. I need some darker paint. There we go. That's a little bit better. Let's just pull that down. This needs to be a little flatter, I think, this orange. Let's just cut that off. A little flatter. And that paint was too wet, so it made a really sharp edge. Let's push that back a little bit and see if I can't soften that edge up a little bit. I just want to change the shape of that mandarin, but I don't want to mess up my my sort of edges by going too wet or being too sharp. There we go. That's not too bad. Let's push a little bit more light into the top edge. So I'm going to mix a very yellowy orange, and now I'm going to add a little white to it because white is opaque. And as long as I have plenty of color in there, it should work out fine. We have a little bit of an edge here. It's a little lighter than the rest of it. And same is true coming across here, just on the edge. And that also helps to sort of soften this because it's becoming very much closer to my background color. But that's sort of by design. And this is light coming across here. Some light sort of striking that edge of the orange. And that's going to help me define these edges. I can go back and forth between my subject and my ground pretty easily. I think there's actually some, let's go a little bit of red, a little bit of bright orange, kind of coming across down into here. And if you feel your paint stiffening up a little bit, just give it a little bit of a spray. Not on your painting, but in your palette. Mine's doing okay. So far, so good. I didn't care for that little skinny mark I just made, but let's see if we can't fix that since it is, after all, gouache. Let's just paint over it, a little bit red. I went out of the lines, my goodness. So let's reestablish that edge. There we go. I don't want to labor over this too much. A little more orange right in there. And again, I can sort of dry brush over that and soften that edge just a little bit. There we go. So this is starting to work out more or less okay. Let's let that kind of dry up. And I want to bring this foreground all the way down. So I'm going to mix up that kind of bright, warm, very warm yellow green. And that's just right. Maybe a little too much color. So I just add a little more white. And I can just sort of scrub it in to my existing paint and get it to have just a nice, really nice transition going in there. And let's actually obliterate this edge a little bit and maybe go a little lighter in there. Give that edge a little bit of a sort of a glow if we can. But it's okay if the edge is completely gone because our viewers are going to connect the dots here. They're going to see a corner. You know, if we have a little bit of something pointing in that direction and something pointing in that direction, people are going to be able to figure out that those connect together. Cover some of that pencil mark. And I think warm that up and let's a little warmer, a little lighter into the back edge of that cast shadow. And I'm still not satisfied with the shape of that little shadow in there. Let's bring that across a little too far. And that happens all the time with me. I kind of get a little out of control with my brush, but you can just push it back pretty easily. And if it changes a little bit because you feel like you made a mistake, it often ends up working out in that, you know, a little heavier paint film creates a little more texture and a little bit more surface quality equals a little bit more visual interest. And, you know, I try not to sweat it when I kind of blow it a little bit. It's not that big a deal. It's only gouache. All right. I think it's highlight time, more or less. I could sort of dial in my shapes a little bit more, but I don't really feel like I need to do that. So I'm going to take some white. I'm going to mix just a little bit of yellow. We could actually mix that in with it. I just want to keep the white needs to be light, but it also needs to be a little bit warm. There's a very bright highlight right up there. And I don't want to go over this a bunch of times, right? Just once. If I keep going over it, if I keep touching it up, it's going to become muddy and sloppy. So we got a highlight in there. We have a variety of sort of highlights in here, which I'm going to sort of simplify to just 2 or 3. And of course, there's a little sort of reflected highlight underneath there. And I can go almost pure white right underneath that dark edge, the edge of the glass. And this one, I kind of want to build it up. Nice and bright. And then I can maybe take a little background color and just sort of cut through on there just to sort of show what we have. And there is actually another highlight that's sort of in here, right above our rim, right in there. Okay, and so it is possible that I overdid these highlights, and sometimes I like to come around the edges with a little bit of the lighter orange color and just cut it back and maybe change the shape a little bit. That kind of radiates out more, so I can cover that a little bit. You don't have to cover it over completely. And this highlight is starting to look a little bit dull. I'm not going to cover it completely, but just a little bit of pure white, just sort of right in there. We'll kind of pump that up just a little bit. And for a little study, this is not the worst little study I've ever made. It's not too bad. It's working out okay. And I could go on forever adjusting little bits, but at a certain point you got to just say, well, it's just a study, and I need to sort of move on. We can keep some of the shapes pretty basic, and it doesn't have to be exactly like what we see. We do want it to be evocative of what we see, but it doesn't have to be exact, because otherwise I would have just used the photo, right? So yeah, I like these brighter, more saturated, reflected lights. I think my core shadows, my darker shadows, are working out okay. I'd like to, it's a little pointy, so let's kind of cut that off a little bit right there. Not too much. I want to make sure I keep those edges soft where they need to be soft. And that's a little darker underneath there. There, that gives a little bit more differentiation from object to object within the bowl, I think. There is a very light, bright bit of reflected light right on the edge of that one right there. And to play that up a little bit, I think I'll just paint some more orange right next to it in there. And that allows that little bit of contrast to sort of pull the edge of that mandarin a little bit forward. So I've taken some liberties with the drawing here, but I've gotten to the gist of it. I've gotten to the important parts that I want to get to. All right. I really, truly hope I didn't ramble too much on this. Again, if you have any questions about this, please, please, please send me a message. Thank you very much for joining me. If you're brand new to my channel or you didn't go to any of my ill-conceived webinars, welcome. And I hope this was a reasonably fun little demo for you to work along with. If you were at one of my webinars, I hope this works out better. I hope it's better. It's in focus. I think the sound is pretty good. And please, you guys, you were so kind in the webinar. Do not hesitate to ask any questions, and I'll get to them as soon as I see them. So thanks a lot, and I'm going to call it a day on this one.